Hello and welcome to Ex Libris, the place where I talk about books. My name is Sarah and this is my sidekick Steinbeck. And today we are in store for another very belated monthly wrap-up. It is the end of April, and so naturally I am going to be talking about all the books I read in February. One day, very soon, I will catch up. Maybe not that soon, but one day. I have gotten some feedback that my videos are a tad too long. Thanks, Mum. So I am going to try my darndest to tailor it a little bit, but you know, it's a book review channel, so I'm going to be talking about books. What am I supposed to remove? Like the dog stuff, or my blatant attempts to get a V sponsorship? Like, what am I supposed to cut out? I don't know. Anyway, so I am going to try to trim the fat a little bit. Okay, let's just get right down to it. The first book I read in February was Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner. So every year I try to read the full Booker Prize long list, of which this was part. Generally, I try to have read the entire long list by the time the winner is announced. Clearly, I missed the boat on Creation Lake, but I got there in the end. So this is a book where the main character is absolutely insufferable. She's the worst. She thinks she is the smartest, the most observant, the most manipulative. She believes she drives better when she's drunk. She is also at pains to let us know that her breasts are very large and do not require a bra. Good to know. She's a secret agent of sorts. She's tasked with infiltrating an environmental group and reporting back to her sponsors, whether that be private sponsors or state sponsorship. We're not entirely sure, but it's basically either state-sponsored or privately funded entrapment, of which she has absolutely no moral ambiguity whatsoever. So this narcissistic and big-breasted agent generally believes that she is the one pulling the strings in all circumstances. She tells us that people around her believe that they're making their own decisions, but only because she's the one who has prompted them. She's the one who is completely and totally in control. Whether or not that is true is open to interpretation. Because we are getting this from her and she is perhaps an unreliable narrator, we don't know if she really is that good or if she just thinks she is. And this does kind of create an interesting dynamic in reading such an unlikable character. I have kind of grown a bit of a fascination for unlikable character narrators lately. This one, I didn't like her straight off the bat, but I found that as the novel progresses, I came to be quite invested in her story. As the book continued, I found myself more uncertain as to how I felt about Sadie, and whether or not I wanted her plan to succeed or fail. There's also a very strange subplot about a man obsessed with Neanderthal history. I wasn't entirely sure about that. It's an interesting book full of a lot of very interesting ideas. I'm not entirely convinced it worked for me, but it is interesting. My next book was Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Those of you who may have watched my very first video, which was my favorite books of 2024, you may remember that I listed the first two parts of this series, Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, as two of my favorite books of last year, except that I counted them as one because I wanted to fit more books on the list. One of the things that I mentioned as being my favorite part of this series, which is called the Locked Tomb series, is the fact that Tamsin Muir doesn't feel the need to explain everything. And for the majority of each book, you're going to have absolutely no idea what's going on and what anything means. Those answers aren't delivered until hopefully later on in the book. I said that this was a benefit in the first two books, especially in Harrow, because it shows a lot of trust between the author and the reader. The author trusts that the reader is going to hang in there and enjoy that build-up and that payoff in the end. And the reader has to trust that the author is going to be able to pull it off. However, by this book, Nona the Ninth, I felt like it's about time to get some of those answers. It's not always a pleasant feeling going through a book and having absolutely no idea where it's going and what anything means. There are so many secrets and there's so much that is not understood. If a majority of your readers are having to go online after reading the book and track down a synopsis or a fan page or an online discussion about what the hell just happened, then maybe it's time to start giving maybe a little bit of exposition. I think it's about time things need to be a little bit more explicit. Various plot points should maybe be explained a little better. As intelligent as readers are, sometimes readers aren't given the benefit of the doubt by a lot of authors. I think maybe Tamsin Muir is giving us a little too much trust. Yeah, just a little bit more explanation, if you please. Also, I would like to see a Noodle the Ninth, because I would like so much more about Noodle the six-legged dog. Please and thank you. Next, I read a very slim little volume called Ness by Robert Macfarlane and illustrated by Stanley Donwood. Stanley Donwood. This is basically a prose poem. It only took me maybe 20 minutes to read. Very, very slim volume. I did really enjoy the kind of British folk horror elements. There are a lot of kind of environmental spirits in this book made up of detritus of the sea and the land that I really enjoyed. They kind of reminded me of the Green Man in Lanny by Max Porter, which is a book I absolutely love and is also prose poetry. But I felt like this, even though it is very short and very slim, there just wasn't there wasn't enough to it. It didn't seem to go anywhere, and I was kind of hoping for a bit more of a payoff. But I did really, really love Robert Macfarlane's writing. The next book I read was Between Dog and Wolf by Christina Gorcheva Newberry. And I haven't heard many people talking about this one, which is surprising because I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was an excellent coming-of-age story set in 1980s Soviet-era Russia. Specifically in Moscow. At the center of the story, you have two teenage girls, Anya and Milka, who have the intense friendship and intense bond that only teenage girls can have. In many ways, they have a very typical adolescence. They They drink, they smoke, they get boyfriends, they hang out. But at the periphery, they are very much aware that living in Soviet Russia severely limits their ability to see the rest of the world, to experience certain things. They feel a little trapped and a little stifled at this point in time, and the author kind of puts this in perspective. They have absolutely no idea that in just a few short years, Soviet Russia is going to fall, the Eastern Bloc will fall, and that the world will open up to them. But as this story goes on, they are still trapped under the impression that this will never change. They believe that they're never going to be able to see the world. Within their families, they get a lot, you see a lot of discussions about the Russian Federation and about communism and what it means to them. And you get all these different perspectives. But at about 2/3 of the way through the book, there is a quite abrupt tonal change that is very confronting, and a little traumatic. And then we kind of jump about 20 or 30 years forward into the future, where the narrator, Anya, is now living in the US. She's married to an American, and she returns to see her parents for the first time in about 20 or 30 years. What is good about this is that we then see how things have changed, and also the nostalgia that people feel towards the Soviet regime, which I thought was very effective. I also loved the way that the young people in this story have discussions about literature, because fiction is the only place that they can actually escape to. So obviously they talk about a lot of great Russian writers like Gogol and Bulgakov and Chekhov, but they also talk about Western writers as well, Ray Bradbury, for example. And the discussions that they have about these themes and these writers are very intelligent, but they're written in a way that you can actually imagine a 16-year-old talking. I think a lot of the time in novels, young people are kind of imbued with this very precocious energy that makes you kind of think, no child I have ever met speaks like that. But this was done in a way that felt really natural, and I really enjoyed those literary references. Yeah, a beautiful and effective and affecting coming of age novel. The next book I read was Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi. This is a horror novel that a lot of horror buffs speak quite highly of. I admit I was maybe a little bit disappointed. I did think it was a perfectly good horror story, but it did not elevate itself to kind of literary fiction. With The Boys in the Valley, it's set around the turn of last century, so I think about 1901 or thereabouts, and is set in a boys' orphanage, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, which is run by some very stern and sometimes sadistic priests. Aren't they always? It's kind of based on the story in the Bible where Jesus casts out a demon from a man into a herd of pigs. But in this case, rather than a herd of pigs, it's a school full of orphans. Then you have like a classic battle between good and evil. Again, a bit of a coming of age story where one young man in particular has to choose between love and faith. The story is maybe a little predictable, but it's a fun and effective horror story. So if you do enjoy horror, give it a go. The next book I read was Staying On by Paul Scott. This was part of my ongoing Booker Prize project, where I am attempting to read every Booker Prize winner from the past. Staying On won in 1970 something? Probably should have looked that up. 1977. It won the Booker Prize in 1977. Staying On tells the story of an elderly couple who, following the independence of India from the British Crown, have stayed on in India, basically because it is more comfortable to be affluent in India than to be poor in Britain. There's also, of course, the undercurrent of British imperialism and the fact that this British couple still uphold the values of imperialism. They interact with Indian people of high caste and high status, but still remain very much apart from the Indian populace. And to a large degree, this book satirizes this kind of belief and this kind of ideology. And it is a very in-depth and sometimes quite harsh and unkind character study of this elderly couple. Of course, they weren't elderly in 1947 during independence, but it is now the 1970s. And they are so determinedly hanging on to the past that they can't see the future. They are quite foolish in their own way, not always entirely likable, but this book is written in a quite humorous way. So as much as we don't necessarily like this pair, encourages us to laugh at and sometimes pity them. I really liked this book. I thought it is an excellent exploration of these two characters. As much as we see the ridiculousness of this couple and of their beliefs and the way they behave, we do feel a little warmly towards them, but recognize that they are people out of time. They have no concept of how other people perceive them and just how much the world has moved on. The 1970s saw a lot of British writers and writers from all over the world kind of exploring what it meant to be post-colonial and what it means culturally to now no longer be part of this far-reaching British Empire. So staying on, I really liked this one. Next we have Boy with a Black Rooster by Stephanie Vorschulte. I really love novels that are kind of have the feel of a grown-up fairy tale. Not that there are any supernatural elements, but just deep dark forests and woodcutters and kings and queens and special quests and things like that. This definitely falls into kind of a dark fairy tale, more of a folk tale. This story is more of a kind of Germanic folk tale, and it does involve a boy with a black rooster. The provenance of this black rooster, and by extension this boy, means that he is not trusted by the villagers. So the story reminds me a little bit of Till by Daniel Kellman. In Boy with Black Rooster, the boy is 11 years old and he is trying to recover a kidnapped child, which leads him to a castle and a competition for whoever stays awake the longest wins a prize. So there are elements of, I suppose, magical realism, and I've seen other people describe it as being in some ways post-apocalyptic, kind of pseudo-medieval. I don't know about the post-apocalyptic, but there is the sense that war has kind of devastated this land. But I felt that it was kind of set out of time. Yes, it does kind of feel quite medieval, but there's a lot of it that could exist at any time in history. And it has this kind of beautiful, magical folk tale element that I really enjoyed. So yeah, if you enjoy The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter, Till by Daniel Kellman, Butcher of the Forest, those kinds of grown-up fairy tale stories, I think you would really enjoy this one, because I certainly did. Next I read The Wall by Marlon Haushofer and translated by Sean Whiteside. This is possibly my favorite book of this month, so much so that I even made an entire video about it, which I will link below if I can work out how to do that. The Wall was first published in 1963 in Austria, but was not translated into English until 1991. So it's kind of become a bit of a feminist lost classic. It's about a woman who is staying with some family members in a cabin in the Austrian Alps, and awakes one morning to find that the cabin has been surrounded by an invisible wall that she cannot get through, and she is completely alone in this environment. Her only company is a dog, a cow, and a succession of cats. And from this bunch of animals, she makes her own little society. This is such a fantastic book. It's kind of a feminist Robinson Crusoe. I did speak about this in my other video, so I can only encourage you to go and watch that, because this book had so many elements to it that I think more people should read. It is kind of a book about what it means to be human, what it means to be a woman, and how someone can make a society when they are possibly the very last person left in the world. Next, I read a book called The Haunting of Tramcar 015 by P. Jaley Clark. I read Ring Shout by this author last year, and I thought it was fantastic. It's an excellent cosmic horror story that is based on the conceit that the KKK are literal monsters. And then there is a group of people who is tasked with hunting them down and killing these genuine, frightening monsters. I thought it was a really interesting take on racism, and also just a brilliant cosmic horror story. So I really recommend Ring Shout. This one, The Haunting of Tramcar 015, I didn't like quite as much, but it is still a very interesting idea. I mean, it's really more of a novella, but it's based on the idea that it's 1912 Cairo, and Egypt has become a powerhouse within the world economy because they have formed a bond with jinns, or genies in kind of Western parlance. And Cairo is now a kind of magical steampunk world. The story itself is kind of a gumshoe detective story, but with jinns. So it is a really interesting and fun story. It just didn't quite work for me. Does the phrase Lamal from Kajagoogoo mean anything to you? Are you a Gen X or geriatric millennial like me, who grew up watching movies like Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal? Was David Bowie in Labyrinth an early sexual awakening for you? It was for me. Well, do I have a book for you. The Shadow Glass by Josh Winning is a nostalgic romp, an adventure through the movies that defined my childhood. Although in this story, there is the very obvious Jim Henson character in this story is called Bob Carmen, and he was a very complicated man who devoted his life to creating a movie called The Shadow Glass, similar to Dark Crystal. What are you doing? So Bob Carmen devoted his life to creating puppets and creating the world of The Shadow Glass, not The Dark Crystal. And now, 20, 30 years later, his son is now packing up all of his possessions because Bob has passed away, only to find puppets are real and they need his help in saving their world. Because of course they do. This is essentially a nostalgia romp for anyone who did grow up watching those classic puppet-led movies like The Dark Crystal, like The Neverending Story, and Labyrinth. But because those movies and Jim Henson doesn't exist in this world, those movies are not explicitly mentioned, but there is kind of that implicit understanding that that is exactly what this story is about. So it is super fun. There's, you know, the son who's trying to reconcile his memory of his father with what the world sees him as. There's a bemused CEO of the Carmen Company, and there's a whole group of nerdy Gen Zs who are along for the ride. I think what I would have liked to see, and if you'll excuse me, we are now going to delve into a very brief movie review, but there is a movie called Psycho Gorman, which also is based on those strong nostalgic vibes, but in this case basically it's more like very 90s Mighty Morphin Power Rangers kind of vibe, where all of the costumes look like they're made out of styrofoam and foam rubber, and it's very DIY. The acting is incredibly over the top. You've got two very annoying children. But what makes this movie a slice of fried gold is that it is R-rated for the sheer amount of blood and gore and bad language. It's brilliant. It's so much fun. So you've got this kind of juxtaposition between a style that is very nostalgic and very kid-friendly 90s, but it goes real hard on the gore. And I thought that was so good. But that is what I think I wanted to see in The Shadow Glass, where, yes, lean into the childhood nostalgia, but if you're going to be writing childhood nostalgia for adults, make it adult. Like, just go real hard, because we're all grown up now and we can handle it. And there's nothing better than like seeing, you know, puppets and space creatures just being absolutely torn apart. Uh, so as much as I did enjoy The Shadow Glass, I thought it was, you know, a fun adventure story, I would have liked it to go so much harder. Okay, that's it. That is all of the books that I read in February. Have you joined the library yet? I keep asking you, join the library, because I think this was 10 books that I read in February. Of those 10 books, two, I found in street libraries in my neighborhood, and all of the others I got from the library. So of those 10 books, not a single one of them I had to pay for. Not a single dime was spent, especially because we don't have dimes in Australia. So all of this is just to say that you don't have to spend money to be a reader. You don't have to buy thousands of dollars worth of book hauls every month. You can get things from the library. You can get things from little free libraries. If anything, go to secondhand stores, or if you have charity shops in your area, check those out for books. You can actually find some real gems, some really special stuff. Creation Lake. I found a brand new copy of Creation Lake in a street library. And if there aren't any street libraries in your area, then build one. You could do that. So again, thank you for watching. Join the library, and I will see you next time.